Cannabis isn't merely a plant, it's a profound test, and many are unknowingly failing. We've been conditioned to perceive weed as either a therapeutic marvel or a societal plague, a gateway to enlightenment or a mindless diversion, a blessed sacrament or a sinful indulgence. However, the true essence of this plant transcends these simplistic labels. Cannabis refuses to be confined by your preconceived notions. Instead, it acts as a powerful amplifier of your inner landscape, which is precisely what renders it both potent and potentially perilous. In ancient traditions, cannabis wasn't a recreational pastime, but a sacred portal, a transformative tool reserved for those prepared to confront the totality of themselves, unfiltered, undistracted, and unadorned. Shamans, mystics, and spiritual seekers harnessed its power to dissolve the ego, not to inflate it. Yet, in contemporary society, cannabis is ubiquitous. It's peddled like confectionery, consumed as a fashionable trend, and even fetishized as a lifestyle. What was once a revered ritual has devolved into a mundane routine. The sacred has been transformed into a spectacle. This exploration isn't a debate on the inherent goodness or badness of weed. Rather, it's a deep dive into its impact on your soul. Long before cannabis was rolled into a joint or commodified for profit, it served as a carefully guarded key, handled with reverence and entrusted only to those who understood the door they were about to unlock. At the genesis of civilization, it was never viewed as mere recreation. It was a sacred substance, aligned with the rhythms of the spirit, employed exclusively within the context of ritual, fasting, prayer, and profound solitude. In ancient India, cannabis was offered to Shiva, the deity of destruction and transformation, the one who dismantles illusion to pave the way for truth. His devotees, the sadhus, didn't partake for amusement. They smoked to experience ego death. The chillum wasn't a mere accessory, it was a sacred sacrament. Within Taoist alchemy, cannabis was combined with other herbs to refine energy, cultivate inner stillness, and induce visionary dreams. It wasn't intended to dull the senses, but to awaken subtle perceptions. Ancient texts depict it as a spiritual ally, capable of sharpening insight or disrupting the qi, depending on the user's inner alignment. For the unprepared, it wasn't a gift, but a formidable trial. Sufi mystics employed hashish in ceremonies to facilitate the dissolution of the self in divine presence. However, even among them, the plant was subject to controversy. Rumi cautioned against intoxication that merely mimicked awakening, leaving the soul untouched. The plant was revered solely when it facilitated the annihilation of the ego, not its magnification. It was to be wielded like a sword with utmost respect, lest it sever the hand that held it. Among the Rastafari, cannabis is revered as ganja, the herb of wisdom, the healing of the nations. Yet it isn't simply smoked, it's prayed over. It's incorporated into reasoning sessions where words and smoke ascend together in a shared pursuit of truth. It's a tool for communion, not escape, intrinsically linked to their liturgy. In those sacred circles, cannabis is consumed not to forget the world, but to remember the divine spark within. And yet here we stand. In the modern West, we've transformed the sacrament into a mere souvenir. What once demanded meticulous preparation now requires nothing at all. You can purchase weed at drive-thrus, light up while engrossed in texting, and mindlessly scroll through digital content while basking in artificial tranquility. The plant remains the same, but the context has been irrevocably altered. Devoid of ritual, cannabis loses its compass. When ceremony vanishes, all that remains is sensation, and sensation without direction becomes mere self-indulgence. The inherent danger lies not within the plant itself, but in our treatment of something once regarded as sacred as if it were mere entertainment. Cannabis doesn't offer predictability, it offers potent amplification. If you're grounded, it deepens your roots. If you're adrift, it amplifies your disorientation. Most individuals unknowingly enter this temple with unclean intentions, only to wonder why they encounter shadows. There are profound truths about cannabis revealed within Hermetic, Gnostic, and mystical traditions that extend beyond the scope of this discussion. We've compiled these insights in our exclusive Insights Academy newsletter, accessible via the link in the description. Subscribe now for exclusive content and a complimentary digital copy of the Kybalion for a limited time. The truth is, the plant doesn't dictate your journey, it serves as a mirror. That mirror reflects everything: your deepest fears, your unresolved pain, your unspoken inquiries. It's indifferent to your curated vibe. It responds solely to your intention. This explains why, in most traditions, preparation was the true ritual, encompassing fasting, chanting, silence, and purification, all undertaken before the first inhalation. This wasn't rooted in superstition, but in a profound understanding that the mind must be stable before it can be expanded. When approached with reverence, cannabis transcends its categorization as a drug. It becomes a door. However, doors are bidirectional, leading to both light and shadow. And the most perilous illusion is believing you can navigate both realms when you've prepared for neither. There's a reason why anxiety, paranoia, or a sense of being watched are frequently reported side effects of cannabis use. Many attribute these experiences to strain variations, incorrect dosages, or idiosyncratic chemical reactions. But what if the root cause lies not within the weed itself? What if the plant is performing precisely as it was intended, stripping away the noise, piercing through illusion, and revealing what lies concealed beneath the surface? Carl Jung termed this the shadow, the repressed aspects of your psyche that you've rejected, disowned, or dared not acknowledge. Not inherently malevolent, but undeniably uncomfortable. Not malicious, but profoundly inconvenient. It encompasses unprocessed grief, suppressed anger, and truths too difficult to confront. The plant doesn't conjure these elements. It merely illuminates them. Like an amplifier, it doesn't create the music. It amplifies what's already playing. And for many, that inner symphony is composed of unresolved pain. This often overlooked facet of cannabis is rarely discussed, as it doesn't align with the marketability of relaxation, good vibes, or a sense of chill. However, any seasoned spiritual practitioner will affirm that the path to awakening invariably begins in the underworld, not in ethereal visions, but in unsettling discomfort, not in radiant light, but in stark confrontation. And cannabis, when wielded consciously, can serve as a powerful instrument for this descent, but only if you're prepared, only if you're willing to confront your authentic self, unmasked and vulnerable. In mystical psychology, this moment of exposure is sacred. It's not a failure, but an invitation. The anxiety that emerges after a puff, the spiraling sense of self-consciousness, the mounting paranoia, these aren't malfunctions, but feedback. The system is responding to a profound shift. It's not a loss of control, but a breakdown of filters, with inner guard dogs panicking as the ego's fortress is breached. Yet modern culture offers no guidance through this tumultuous process. There's no guiding shaman, no wise elder, no supportive circle. You're left alone in your room, staring at the ceiling, heart racing, grappling with a sense of dissolution. And the truth is, you are dissolving. That's the plant's purpose, to dismantle the artificial, to burn away the performance. And if you're unprepared for this alchemical process, it can feel like a waking nightmare, not because the plant is flawed, but because the encounter is profoundly real. Esoteric traditions understood this inherent risk. In her writings on psychic self-defense, Dion Fortune elucidated how altered states render the etheric body porous, susceptible not only to insights but also to external energetic interference. If your internal landscape is chaotic, cannabis won't rectify it. It will amplify it. It invites everything to the surface, which is essential for true healing. However, if you flee from that surfacing, if you numb it or distract yourself from it, the cycle will repeat, high after high, until nothing feels sacred, only jarring. This underscores why cannabis, despite its natural origins, isn't automatically safe. It doesn't discern between the prepared and the unprepared. It doesn't select who should see and who should slumber. It simply draws back the curtain. What you do with what you find behind it is entirely your responsibility. And herein lies the most pervasive misunderstanding. The expectation that the plant should invariably induce positive feelings. That's the deception. The truth is, it's meant to foster clear-seeing, illuminating pain, joy, and confusion alike, recognizing that all emotions are information. It's your spirit whispering, "Pay attention, look at this." However, because we're conditioned to fear discomfort, we label these moments as bad trips and retreat without engaging in introspection or learning, simply adding another tale of weed-induced anxiety to our repertoire. But cannabis doesn't manufacture anxiety. It exposes the anxiety you were already carrying. It didn't invent the discomfort, it revealed it. And that honesty renders it one of the most authentic substances you'll ever encounter. However, honesty isn't always gentle and truth doesn't always feel good. The plant functions as a mirror, and the reflection may not always be flattering, but perhaps it's precisely what you needed to see. One of the greatest spiritual pitfalls is mistaking sensation for truth, and cannabis, perhaps more than any other plant, entices us into that delusion. You light up, you feel more open, thoughts feel profound, music resonates more deeply, and synchronicities appear as hidden messages from the universe. Your journal fills with epiphanies you'd never articulate sober. It all feels significant, even mystical. But the crucial question remains, does any of it genuinely transform you? The high itself can be profoundly seductive, mimicking transcendence and peace. But imitation isn't integration. Feeling expanded is not synonymous with becoming whole. Cannabis can create the illusion of spiritual clarity without the solid foundation to sustain it, rendering it dangerous, not because of its physical effects, but because it deceives the soul into believing it has arrived. You begin to believe you've evolved simply because you experienced something profound. But depth isn't measured by intensity. It's measured by what you carry back from the experience and how you embody it when the high fades. Many regular cannabis users report sudden breakthroughs, profound realizations regarding their trauma, a sense of interconnectedness with all life, and heightened presence in the moment. These experiences are undeniably real. However, the danger arises when these realizations remain unanchored, unapplied, suspended in the ethereal realm. They morph into what esoteric teachers call spiritual inflation, an ego-driven expansion based on the feeling of transformation without the work that sustains it. This aligns with what Hermetic and occult traditions termed the false light experiences that appear enlightened but are merely mental simulations. In Kabbalistic mysticism, this corresponds to the sphere of Hod, representing the brilliance of intellect divorced from grounded truth. It gleams like gold but crumbles like ash. You believe you've beheld the light, but you've only seen a reflection. It's no coincidence that many long-term cannabis users begin to conflate insight with identity. They begin to wear the experience rather than integrating it, adopting spiritual language, feigning enlightenment, and quoting philosophers and mystics. But their lives remain unchanged. Their patterns persist. Their relationships fail to deepen. Their suffering doesn't dissipate. It merely becomes more eloquently expressed. The plant has become a mere prop in a performance of progress. Osho astutely observed, "Substances open doors that only silence should open." He wasn't denying their power, but cautioning against their inherent instability. A door forced open doesn't remain open indefinitely, and the vision it reveals can distort reality if the mind isn't adequately prepared to receive it. The high can become a pedestal from which you look down upon those who haven't shared your perceived insights, while in reality nothing has been seen with true clarity, only felt with intensified emotion. The crux of the matter isn't the insight itself, but what you do with it. Cannabis can undoubtedly offer perspective, but unless that perspective translates into practical application, it remains mere stimulation. If it doesn't alter how you engage in conflict, how you confront your shadow, how you serve others, how you navigate suffering, it's a spiritual distraction masquerading as awakening. And that's the danger, not the plant, not the smoke, but the narrative you construct around its meaning. The high isn't the destination, it's a doorway. But if you remain standing in the doorway, believing you've arrived, you'll never actually enter the room. You become addicted not to the substance, but to the illusion of progress, a far more insidious form of dependency than any chemical addiction. For this reason, traditions possessing spiritual depth never deified the high. They utilized it as a pointer towards something deeper. They never glorified the vision. They inquired about its demands. Because true awakening isn't what transpires on the plant, it's what unfolds afterward, in the silence that ensues, in the choices that emerge, in the humility to acknowledge that a single glimpse doesn't equate to comprehensive understanding. Cannabis offers access, not arrival. However, the world doesn't require more access. It requires more anchors, more individuals who not only visit the sacred but embody it, who not only feel the truth but live it. Cannabis's influence extends beyond the mind, impacting the subtle body, the invisible architecture of your being that carries your thoughts, emotions, memories, and energetic imprints. Though invisible, its effects are palpable. And when the plant interacts with this energetic field, it amplifies whatever is already present, regardless of permission. For some, this unlocks intuition, heightened sensitivity, and a profound sense of presence. For others, it unleashes chaos. This chaos isn't random, it's a byproduct of energy that hasn't been cleared or harmonized. Visualize the subtle body as a delicate musical instrument. When properly tuned, cannabis acts as a bow drawn across a string, eliciting resonance, harmony, and even profound silence. However, if the instrument is dusty, out of tune, or misaligned, the plant merely amplifies the dissonance. Within that amplified noise, individuals often mistake stimulation for wisdom. You feel more intensely, but you aren't necessarily perceiving more clearly. You're simply louder internally. And when the inner space is crowded, clarity becomes unattainable. Traditions possessing this understanding emphasize the importance of energetic hygiene. It's not a mystical concept, but a practical application of spiritual wellness. Just as showering maintains physical hygiene, practices such as fasting, breathwork, chanting, cold exposure, prayer, and periods of silence aren't mere accessories, they're essential clearing rituals. They stabilize the energetic field, ensuring that when you open the door with a plant like cannabis, you aren't stepping into a space filled with unresolved debris. Within Reiki and other energetic healing modalities, cannabis is sometimes described as a field disruptor, not because it causes harm, but because it creates a surge in sensitivity. This surge can facilitate access to subtle energies, but can also render you energetically porous. Practitioners who lack grounding often find their sessions destabilized or chaotic after cannabis use, with increased sensations but diminished control. The same holds true in Kundalini work, where cannabis is known to awaken dormant energy before the body is prepared to manage it. You might experience openness, electricity, even euphoria, only to crash, spiral, or find yourself unable to meaningfully ground the experience. Amazonian shamans assert that every plant opens, but every plant also tests, and cannabis is no exception. They believe that each plant carries a unique consciousness, a distinct spirit, and a specific energetic frequency. When that spirit enters you, it initiates communication not through language, but through emotion, memory, and energetic sensation. If you're not mentally, emotionally, and spiritually cleansed, that communication becomes garbled. The plant's message becomes distorted by your own unresolved residue, resulting not in clarity but in confusion masquerading as insight. This explains why so many individuals feel drained, unfocused, or emotionally vulnerable after heavy cannabis use. Not because the plant is inherently depleting, but because they entered the experience unprepared, lacking clearing, containment, and reverence. It's akin to plugging a delicate instrument into a distorted amplifier with frayed wires, resulting not in harmonious music but in discordant noise. And the longer you're exposed to this dissonance, the more it erodes your sensitivity. Cannabis interacts with the energetic body like fire interacts with a dry forest. It spreads, it consumes, and it illuminates, but only if the space is clear. Otherwise, it merely burns uncontrollably. Devoid of grounding, clarity, and intentional boundaries, what was intended to elevate can begin to fragment. You experience a loss of focus and willpower, succumbing to a fog that feels peaceful yet harbors a subtle stagnation. And here lies a profound danger. You begin to mistake that fog for genuine calm, associating the numbing of sensation with authentic healing. But healing isn't synonymous with numbness. Healing is the restoration of clarity and power, not its suppression. And cannabis, when used without energetic awareness, can temporarily mask imbalances rather than resolving them. The critical question then becomes, is your energetic system sufficiently clear to receive clarity? Have you properly prepared your inner temple before inviting the plant in? Because cannabis doesn't clean house, it simply illuminates the existing conditions. What you perceive depends entirely on what was already present within. Once, cannabis was reserved for when the soul was ready. Now it's often used to mark the end of a long week. This shift wasn't sudden. It was gradual, subtle, and veiled as liberation. What was once sacred has become symbolic. What was once intentional has become impulsive. We've transitioned from smoker's spirit to smoker's content. And in this process, the plant hasn't lost its inherent power. We've merely lost our way of holding it. In Rastafarian tradition, cannabis wasn't something you did alone in your room to alleviate stress. It was integrated into sacred reasoning sessions, ritual gatherings dedicated to philosophical and spiritual reflection. The smoke ascended in unison with chants, prayers, and the rhythmic pulse of drums. It was a communal ascent, not a solitary escape, prioritizing alignment with Jah, God, Source, the Ultimate One, rather than mere pleasure. And if your heart wasn't pure, the herb would expose it. It wasn't entertainment, but a powerful initiation. Within the African diaspora, particularly in Afro-Brazilian religions like Candomblé and Umbanda, while cannabis may not always be the focal point, the underlying principle governing its use remains paramount. Every plant embodies an axe, a spiritual frequency, a purpose, a distinct vibration. Misusing a plant is tantamount to misusing its inherent energy, thereby inviting imbalance. The ritual dictated the effect, the ceremony created the sacred container, and nothing sacred was taken without being earned. Casual consumption was non-existent, replaced by profound communion. However, this ethos stands in stark contrast to the desires of the modern world. Ritual demands time, discipline, and humility, qualities deemed inconvenient in a society that thrives on convenience and instant gratification. Thus, the plant was extracted from its cultural roots, sanitized for mass consumption, and rebranded as a lifestyle. Now it's packaged in sleek designs, endorsed by social media influencers, and marketed with the same shallow promises as a wellness smoothie. This will make you feel better. Gone is any mention of shadow work, mirrors, or challenging introspection, replaced by carefully curated mood boards, pastel fonts, and a superficial nod to mindfulness. The sacred has been commercialized, the ceremony has been discarded, and cannabis has been reduced to a product, devoid of its transformative potential as a portal. Today, individuals light up while mindlessly binge-watching shows that perpetuate societal programming, scrolling through vapid content designed to hijack their dopamine reward system. There's no supportive circle, no sacred chant, no contemplative silence, just layer upon layer of external stimulation. And within that layered chaos, the plant transforms from a purifying fire into a suffocating fog, from a source of clarity into a catalyst for further numbness. Even festivals that claim to be spiritual with their burning incense, ecstatic music, and chakra stickers often reduce the plant to mere background noise. The ritual becomes a performance, the ceremony a costume, and the plant's true essence, its power to transform, disrupt, and awaken, is buried beneath layers of superficial aesthetics. But cannabis has no interest in aesthetic appeal. Its spirit is ancient, untamed, and unapologetically authentic. It's indifferent to your carefully crafted branding. It responds solely to your intention. And without a proper container, its potent energy spills, flowing into your distractions, anxieties, and unchecked wounds. Devoid of purposeful direction, it simply amplifies your current state. That's why some individuals feel inspired while others feel trapped. Same plant, different vessel. By stripping away the ritual, we've effectively dismantled the very structure that made the experience sacred. What remains is entertainment masquerading as healing, a mere mimicry of depth, a hollow echo of what once was truly holy. The plant itself hasn't changed, but the way we engage with it has been fundamentally altered. Until we reclaim the container, we'll continue to wonder why the experience feels so shallow, inconsistent, or even chaotic. It's not that cannabis has lost its inherent power. We've simply ceased preparing ourselves to receive it. The ritual was never a performance for the benefit of the divine. It was a means of preparing you, cleansing your mind, your energy, and your heart, so that when the plant opened the door, you could walk through it with grace and understanding, not confusion. We haven't lost the sacred, we've stopped recognizing it. The most dangerous lie is the belief that intention alone is sufficient, that if your heart is pure, the plant will inherently guide you. However, cannabis, like all true spiritual allies, doesn't operate based on sentiment. It responds to energy, to readiness, and to the clarity of your inner world, not your wishful thinking. Too many seekers approach cannabis with curiosity but without a compass, lighting up to feel better, think more profoundly, escape boredom, or soften the edges of stress. They forget that the plant doesn't give you peace. It reveals whether peace was already present within. When used with discernment, cannabis can be a profound ally, assisting you in detaching from the incessant chatter of the ego, observing your patterns with greater clarity, and loosening the grip of your limiting internal narratives. However, the key always resides not in the plant itself, but in the individual you are when you encounter it. Without structure, The experience becomes slippery, and without reflection, the insights evaporate. Without grounding, the openness transforms into fragmentation. So how do you harness the potential of this plant without being unwittingly manipulated by it? First, by recognizing that cannabis should never be your knee-jerk reaction. If you feel anxious, resist the urge to smoke. Instead, sit with the discomfort, explore its origins, and pose questions to it. If you're restless, don't seek escape. Engage your body, breathe deeply, or express yourself through journaling. Only when the body is settled and the mind is clear can the plant function as a tool for refinement rather than disruption. Prior to partaking, ask yourself, what am I genuinely seeking: clarity or comfort, truth or temporary relief? Am I reaching for the plant out of genuine alignment or mere avoidance? There's a vast chasm between using cannabis to consciously explore consciousness and using it to suppress what consciousness is attempting to reveal. One approach is sacred, the other is simply another self-perpetuating loop. The wisest traditions never relied solely on cannabis. It was always integrated as one component within a larger, holistic spiritual ecosystem. Fasting, silence, chanting, prayer, breathwork, and cleansing rituals weren't superfluous traditions. They were essential practices of spiritual hygiene. They served to prepare the vessel, clear away accumulated clutter, and tune the nervous system, enabling the plant to perform its deepest work. Grounding practices are of paramount importance. Partake in silence, connect with the earth, disconnect from electronic devices, and minimize external distractions. Allow the plant to guide you inward, not outward. Document your insights, engage in thoughtful reflection, and integrate your newfound awareness into your actions, your words, and your relationships. This is where the true alchemy transpires, not merely in what you perceive, but in how you actively apply what you've learned. Cannabis use without intentional integration becomes a form of spiritual entertainment, leading you to chase the feeling of enlightenment rather than undertaking the work of embodying it. It subtly infiltrates your identity, leading you to falsely attribute your depth to the plant, believing you cannot access wisdom independently. And this marks the genesis of dependency, not merely chemical, but existential. You forget that the plant is simply a mirror, reflecting a depth that was always present within you. Cannabis merely facilitated its revelation. The true journey begins when you can access that state of expanded awareness without reliance on external substances. You aren't meant to reside perpetually within the high. You're meant to translate the insights gained into your daily existence. The illumination itself is not the ultimate prize, its tangible application is the transformative force. Can you extend kindness without the need for euphoria? Can you maintain presence without chemical assistance? Can you navigate conflict, boredom, and routine while remaining awake and aware? This is how you utilize the plant without succumbing to its control, by ensuring it never becomes your sole source of meaning, by returning to your own self as the center. The plant may open the door, but only you can traverse the path. And if you're not actively walking, you're simply circling, experiencing heightened sensations but gaining no meaningful insight. You don't require more highs. You require more brutal honesty, the kind that isn't always palatable, but always rings true. The kind that dismantles shimmering illusions and compels you to ask, is this facilitating my growth or merely helping me to hide? Cannabis was never intended for solitary use. Across diverse cultures, lineages, and centuries, its spiritual application was almost invariably collective. Not because individuals were incapable of accessing altered states independently, but because those who understood the plant recognized a fundamental truth. Without a container, power becomes unpredictable, and without community, insight is prone to distortion. The plant may unlock you, but it's the presence of a supportive circle that holds you secure. Within the Rastafari tradition, cannabis is not consumed casually. It's an integral part of reasoning sessions, gatherings where the herb is passed with reverence, accompanied by scripture readings, thoughtful discussions, sacred chants, and a conscious pursuit of divine truth. The objective isn't merely to get high, but to achieve a profound state of alignment. Words are shared with deliberate intention, silence is honored, and each participant embodies the roles of both student and teacher. The herb circulates clockwise, mirroring the flow of time, energy, and the sacred cycle of life. Within that space, cannabis isn't the focal point. It serves as a bridge, facilitating deeper connection and understanding. A similar principle prevails among certain indigenous cultures. In Amazonian and Central African societies, while cannabis may not always be the central sacrament, as with ayahuasca or tobacco, the core principles governing its use remain consistent. Substances that alter perception are administered only when the group, the ritual, and the underlying intention are firmly in place. The experience belongs not to the individual but to the container, the sacred songs, the heartfelt prayers, the communal fire, the wisdom of the elders, and the watchful presence of unseen spirits. You never embark on this journey alone. Even when your eyes are closed, the circle provides unwavering support. The value lies not solely in what the plant reveals to you, but in how others assist you in interpreting those revelations upon your return. Contrast this with the modern experience, a joint in one hand, a smartphone in the other. No grounding, no prior preparation, no clear exit strategy, just incessant stimulation and profound solitude. What was meant to be sacred devolves into another episode of dissociation, setting the stage for a downward spiral. Because when you're cracked open and there's no one present to assist in your reintegration, the insights fail to take root. They fragment into disconnected pieces. You begin to believe you've tapped into something profoundly significant. Yet there's no external witness, no reflective mirror, no calibrating influence. It transforms into a private religion of half-remembered thoughts and disconnected realizations, leading you to mistake loneliness for genuine enlightenment. However, within a genuine sacred circle, a transformative dynamic unfolds. You're genuinely heard, truly seen, and reminded that your insights are part of a larger, interconnected truth, and that what you've experienced holds significance not only for your own personal growth, but for the benefit of the entire community. You assume responsibility for the gifts the plant has bestowed upon you. Because the plant doesn't merely give, it also asks, what will you do with this expanded vision? Will you choose to live differently? Will you dedicate yourself to service? Will you commit to healing? Within sacred circles, the ego has limited room to perform. You can't feign awakening when others present within the circle perceived through your carefully constructed facade. You can't claim transformative growth without being held accountable. There's no place to conceal yourself within the confines of the ceremony. And that's precisely why it works. Because it's not about how the plant makes you feel. It's about how the experience is witnessed and validated. The collective presence of the circle prevents fleeting illusions from solidifying into rigid doctrines. When you're alone, there's no challenge, no resistance, and consequently, everything feels undeniably true. However, not everything you feel is necessarily aligned with truth, and not every idea that emerges during an altered state is inherently sacred. Some are mere projections of your own biases, some are distortions born from unresolved trauma, and some are simply mental noise disguised in spiritual attire. The circle serves to separate the genuine signal from the static. It helps you to assess the validity of your vision in the light of shared reality. Even in the context of modern cities, intentional sacred containers can be cultivated. A gathering of close friends, softly lit candles, complete disconnection from electronic devices, a clearly articulated shared intention, a collective moment of silence both before and after the experience, and a mutual commitment to reflect upon the insights gained, to hold space for each other, and to transform the experience from a mere trip into a catalyst for profound personal transformation. You don't require a remote jungle or an ancient temple to engage in this practice. You require reverence, a carefully crafted ritual, and a supportive community. Without these elements, cannabis floats aimlessly like incense in a windy room, beautiful, yet ultimately directionless. The plant asks for structure because its spirit is immensely potent, and like any concentrated power, it amplifies whatever it encounters. Within a collective setting, it can amplify clarity, healing, and profound vision. Conversely, when used alone and without grounding, it can amplify confusion, illusion, and ego. Therefore, perhaps the most important question is no longer simply, what are you smoking for, but who are you smoking with? The presence or absence of a sacred container often determines whether the plant becomes your trusted teacher or merely a fleeting distraction. There arrives a point in every seeker's journey where the initial thrill of the experience begins to wane and its meaning becomes increasingly elusive. The novelty diminishes, the visions become repetitive, and the insights start to echo familiar themes. And that's precisely when the deeper path unfolds, not through the pursuit of increased intensity, but through the cultivation of profound honesty. Because the genuine work lies not in what you perceive while altered, but in how you conduct yourself in your everyday, sober existence. Discernment then becomes the new high, not external stimulation, but profound inner clarity, not fleeting euphoria, but authentic alignment. Cannabis can undoubtedly unlock doors, a fact that has never been in question. However, merely unlocking doors is relatively easy. What demands true effort is consciously walking through them with intentionality, integration, and humility, a step that many avoid. It's far easier to chase the feeling of awakening than to dedicate oneself to the often arduous work of embodying it. It's easier to light up than to embrace stillness, easier to feel deep than to actually live deeply. However, merely feeling something doesn't automatically render it true, and simply seeing something doesn't make it inherently real. Discernment is the critical faculty that separates illusion from genuine insight. It protects you from mistaking a mere echo for the genuine essence. In Greek philosophy, discernment was termed krinein, the inner blade that cuts through deception. In Vedanta, it's viveka, the power to distinguish the real from the unreal. This isn't about embracing skepticism, but about cultivating spiritual maturity, the ability to question even your most profound experiences and to ask, is this the ultimate truth, or is this merely what I wanted to hear? Because cannabis will provide both speaking in riddles, in poetry, and in emotionally charged language. And if you lack grounding, you'll construct entire belief systems based on metaphors that were never intended to be taken literally. This is where spiritual inflation takes root, with the ego subtly rebranding itself as awakened, adopting mystical language, donning the trappings of transcendence, and quoting scriptures without authentically living them. It develops an addiction not to the plant itself, but to the intoxicating feeling of being special, of being in the know. You begin to conflate your increased sensitivity with feelings of superiority, and you cease listening to anything that doesn't reinforce your elevated state. This underscores why the cultivation of discernment must precede the use of cannabis as a spiritual tool. Without it, you aren't genuinely opening yourself to higher truth. You're merely rearranging the furniture within the confines of your own meticulously crafted delusion. The plant serves as an amplifier, magnifying whatever is already present. If you harbor confusion, it will proliferate. If you cultivate clarity, it will deepen. The plant doesn't discriminate, it simply reflects. And so the fundamental question becomes, are you willing to sharpen your inner blade? Are you prepared to ask uncomfortable questions about your motivations, your expectations, and your deeply ingrained patterns? Are you willing to set the plant aside when it no longer serves your highest growth? This may be the most challenging test of all, to refrain from using the plant when you don't truly need it, and to recognize that the wisdom was never intrinsically located within the leaf, but in how the leaf assisted you in remembering the wisdom that already resides within you. Cannabis is not the path itself, but a valuable compass. It can point the way, provide direction, but it cannot walk the path for you, and it certainly cannot carry you. The plant may hold up a mirror, but mirrors don't create. They merely reflect, and they remain static. You are the one who must initiate movement. And if the reflection itself becomes the focal point, you lose sight of its intended purpose. This is the critical juncture that many never reach, halting instead at the level of sensation and poetic expression. However, the mystics, the seekers, the ones who genuinely walk the path, venture further. They cultivate the ability to trust the quiet that follows the altered state, learning to discern the messages that aren't accompanied by euphoria, embracing discomfort as a valuable teacher. Because the ultimate goal isn't to remain perpetually high, but to remain perpetually awake, not just when the plant opens your eyes, but when you awaken each morning and consciously choose to live in alignment with your deepest values, grounded in reality and guided by authenticity. That embodies the essence of true spiritual practice. That is the journey beyond illusion. There arrives a point when every tool must be laid down, every shortcut surrendered, and every altered state examined for what it truly was. A spark, a signal, a mere beginning, never the final destination. Cannabis is not the answer. It never has been. At its best, It's a skilled teacher. At its worst, it becomes another distraction dressed as depth. And if you're truly listening, you'll recognize when it's time to cease chasing the smoke and begin cultivating the fire within. The most profound lesson that cannabis can impart is that you never genuinely needed it. Not because it's inherently worthless, but because its inherent power was always intended to reflect something that lies dormant within you, something yearning to be remembered. The clarity you experienced was always yours, and the stillness, the profound insights, the sense of interconnectedness. None of those originated from the plant itself. The plant merely peeled back the layers, revealing feelings you had forgotten how to access. But remembering is not synonymous with becoming. The journey doesn't conclude with the glimpses you've been shown. It begins with the conscious choices you make. Now. This is why ancient traditions never glorified the plant. They treated it with reverence and utilized it as a doorway, never as a crutch. The ceremony would inevitably end, and the process of integration would commence. You would then take what you had perceived and translate it into action, into genuine presence, and into heartfelt humility. You would engage in conflict with a renewed perspective, love with fewer conditions, and serve from a deeper wellspring of compassion. That embodies the core essence of the practice. What value is vision if it fails to translate into meaningful change in your everyday life? What purpose does insight serve if you fail to apply it amidst the messiness, the boredom, and the inherent discomfort of your actual existence? It's easy to cultivate a feeling of spirituality surrounded by smoke and silence, but it's far more challenging to maintain that connection in the midst of traffic jams, heart-wrenching grief, and the endless repetition of the mundane. However, it's precisely within these ordinary moments that genuine spiritual growth unfolds, not on a secluded mountaintop, but in the valley of everyday life. Not within an artificially altered state, but in the conscious choice to remain awake when it would be far easier to simply drift back to sleep. Integration is not glamorous, psychedelic, or particularly aesthetic. It's grounded in discipline, consistent follow-through, and the wisdom to recognize when to close the door to ceremony and open the door to embrace life fully, walking through it with grace and mindful intention. This embodies what the plant asks of you, not mere reverence or blind worship, but embodied presence. You were never intended to become dependent upon the teacher. So, to wrap things up, what we've really explored is that cannabis isn't just something to be enjoyed or feared, but a powerful amplifier. It reflects back to us what's already inside, both the beautiful and the challenging. It's about understanding that the plant itself isn't the destination. It's a tool, a mirror that can help us see ourselves more clearly and ultimately live more authentically. The key is intention, preparation, and most importantly, integration, taking those insights and embodying them in our everyday lives with or without the smoke. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you had similar experiences? What are your perspectives on using cannabis as a spiritual tool? Leave a comment below, ask a question, or just join the discussion. I'm genuinely curious to hear what resonates with you. And if you found this insightful, please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future explorations into the deeper aspects of consciousness, spirituality, and the plant kingdom. Thanks for watching, and may your journey be filled with both light and truth.